there's a certain grim realism about war, which you can't avert your eyes from. There it is. There are the buildings falling down. There are the bombs going off. There's the blood on the street. Most recently, the Russians strike at a nuclear reactor. Fortunately, this isn't producing nuclear fallout or nuclear contamination, but it shows you Putin. Putin's a guy who knows what he wants. He doesn't care about who he has to pulverize in order to get it. He's willing to pay the cost. And this is not a guy who, cares about his worldwide reputation, or here's a guy who you can somehow dissuade. We're going to take him off of Twitter. We're going to close down all the Russian accounts on Twitter. None of this is really going to matter. This is the guy who wants the Ukraine. Now, the real question is why? What's in it for Putin? Why is it so important for this big grizzly bear Russia to crush this little puppy dog, let's say, called the Ukraine? Well, the political scientist John Mearsheimer has a theory about this. And I want to go into this theory in a little bit of depth. And you'll notice that in doing it, I'm doing something that is really not common in our debate today. We don't have really much of a debate at all over foreign policy. I remember from the Reagan years, and Debbie will remember too, competing theories about trying to understand the Soviet Union, and a kind of vigorous debate, left and right, but also debate within the right about what type of sort of anti-communism, what strategies are most effective. We're getting very little of this. What we get is a sort of party line from the kind of neoliberal left. We get a few exaggerated assertions, Putin is the new Hitler, things like that. But in terms of actual understanding of Ukraine and Putin, his motives, what he's after, very little of that. Well, this is where John Mearsheimer comes in, and this is one of the leading students of the region and one of the leading thinkers of the so-called realist school. So the realist school is based on the idea that, look, with a lot of countries, there are some countries with which ideology is paramount. And so, for example, you might have China, where they're teaching Marxism, Leninism in the schools, and ideology is important to them. And also not to mention a justification for their centralized control. But there are other countries like Russia, which are kind of gangster regimes. Now, Russia in the old Soviet days was an ideological state. But under Putin, it's not. It's basically, we're a big country. We've lost a lot of our power. We're trying to get it back. And we don't like pesky little dogs, if you will, barking at us in our grizzly bear's lair. That's basically the realist view. Now, what Mearsheimer says is that Russia could live with a democratic Ukraine. They could care less whether Ukraine is democratic or not. What they do care about is whether Ukraine is hostile to Russia or not. That's what they care about. And according to Mearsheimer, the West has now for 25 years been feeding the Ukraine with what you can call dangerous illusions. So what's the dangerous illusion? The dangerous illusion that kind of settled itself into sort of neoliberal elite circles after the end of the Cold War was this. We don't need to think of the world in terms of realpolitik anymore. This is not a case of power politics being played out the way it did in the 18th or the 19th century. That was then, but this is now. We're now above all that. We're integrating the whole world into a kind of neoliberal order. It's going to be based upon democratic societies. It's going to be based upon trade. It's going to be based upon this idea that we are all inhabitants of the same interconnected planet. It's basically kind of your World Economic Forum pablum. And the idea is that it's one thing to go to Davos and ski, and at the end of the day to mouth this kind of these kinds of slogans. It's a whole other thing to go to a little country which is sitting right next to a really big and dangerous country that is nervously looking over its shoulder and tell Ukraine, hey, Ukraine, listen, you may be a little dog, but you see that grizzly bear over there? Go bite him. Go bite him. Go snap at his ankles. Don't worry. happy. You're part of the West, you see? You're part of this new democratic neoliberal order. You're the future. Putin's the past. So go get him. Go get him. We're behind you. And then Ukraine goes, okay, let's go get him. Let's go get him. And then the grizzly bear turns around, whop, and then suddenly the little dog turns around and goes, okay, where are all my friends? Where are all my allies? I thought all these people were going to come rescue me. Turns out no one's going to come rescue you. No one is going to send troops. Nobody wants to fight on your behalf. You're on your own, pal. So this is Mearsheimer's point. It is grossly irresponsible to go to a little country sitting on the edge of a big country. I mean, you can kind of understand this by flipping it around. Imagine, let's say right now, if China were to say, listen, we're going to make it our policy to cultivate very close ties with Mexico and Canada so that we can basically egg them on to confront the United States. Think of how we would feel about this. Think how we would respond. We would be, in that sense, the grizzly. We'd be like, wait a minute, Canada? Really? The Canadians? Well, who's putting them up to it? The Canadians themselves are not capable of this. Oh, it's the Chinese. Really? So the point is that big powers and strong powers get really nervous when in their very backyard, they're being provoked by external forces. Now, the United States, I concede, is stronger than Russia. Mearsheimer, I think, knows this too. But that applies to a straight-out confrontation, you may say, on neutral ground between the two parties. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm an MMA fighter, you're an MMA fighter, let's get in the ring. But what if we're not in the ring? What if we're talking about Russia's own backyard? What if we're talking about fighting not in the middle, but over there? Well, it's much more difficult for us to conduct hostilities. Here is Adam Kinzinger. Let's establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Really? How? How are we going to do that? Are we going to send thousands of bombers over there and shoot down Russian MiGs? Shoot down Russian planes over the Ukraine? The irresponsibility of this, the risk of starting World War III over a country we're not willing to send a single troop, a single man over there to fight for, just shows, in a sense, the kind of recklessness, the unrealism, the illusory nature of neoliberal rhetoric. And this, I think, is Mearsheimer's point. Now, I don't agree with everything in Mearsheimer's analysis. He has an article, this actually came out years ago, and predicted all this, where he says, quote, why the Ukraine crisis is the West's fault. Now, I wouldn't say that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is our fault. It's Putin's fault. He did it. He's responsible for it. But Mearsheimer's more subtle point is we sort of egged them on. We egged on the Ukrainians, and in that sense, we pushed this conflict forward. We made it more likely by telling the Ukraine what? Listen, you can be part of the EU. Listen, you can be part of NATO. We're this fighting alliance where we all hang together. We go get the Russians. And the Ukrainians are like, yeah, let's do it. And now it is they, more than we, who have to face the firestorm.